All right, what's going on, everyone? So yesterday we got news that 3 Americans were killed and as many as 30 wounded in a drone strike in Jordan. For those of you who've been watching this channel for a while, unfortunately, this is kind of expected. I mean, just yesterday talked in the video before this news came out saying that the mainstream news outlets aren't even talking about this, and I don't know why. It's 150, probably north of 160 attacks against American forces throughout the Middle East just in the last couple months. It was not a matter of if American soldiers would be killed, just a matter of when. And unfortunately, that time came yesterday, so we'll talk about what happened, what this means going forward, and potential U.S. responses to that attack. If you remember the Somali pirates, not a lot of news about them recently. They're back at it, never really stopped, kind of ramping up activities. And with Al-Shabaab, the Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist organization, taking over more territory in Somalia, it just adds fuel to the fire. That is the international shipping crisis around the Horn of Africa, right? Layer this on top of what the Houthis are already doing. And then news came out last week about a lone wolf style attack in Edmonton. And there were some early statements I saw going around saying that this was due to the war in Gaza. Maybe, I want to be careful with this one, but this is also a threat that I've talked about a lot. The potential for these lone wolf style attacks inspired by events in the Middle East. So I want to lay out the information we have there, but we'll be careful with that one because it's not entirely clear, the complete motivations of that individual. So I'm recording this at 9 a.m. Central on Monday, January 29th, 2024. So early yesterday, we got news that 3 U.S. soldiers were killed and more than 30 service members injured in a drone attack at a small U.S. outpost in Jordan. The name of that outpost is Tower 22. So this is according to the Pentagon, around 350 U.S. personnel are stationed there. It's been in use for a long time. Jordan is a U.S. ally. The reason that the U.S. forces are there are in continuation of this defeat ISIS mission. Right, so we're partnered with the Jordanian military in a lot of ways, and then Tower 22 helps assist operations into Syria and Iraq. So where Tower 22 sits is kind of right at the border of Iraq, Syria, and Jordan, just right across the border into Jordan. I did see some confusion yesterday. The initial report put out by Islamic Resistance in Iraq, and I'll pull up their statement here. We talked about this in yesterday's video. They claim multiple attacks against U.S. forces in Syria. And the U.S. put out this statement of Americans being killed in Jordan. I think there was a little bit of confusion. It does look like the Americans were on Jordanian territory when they were killed. Jordan has since said that none of their forces were wounded or killed in this attack. So one of the other bases that was hit during this wave yesterday was 3 or 4 attacks claimed by the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. One of them was against Al-Tanf in Syria, which is just 12 miles north of Tower 22. So all things considered, very close proximity to each other. So in terms of responsible party here, we don't have a specific group yet that has said they carried out this attack. The Islamic Resistance in Iraq yesterday put out those statements right about the same time. The timing lines up, the location lines up. For some attacks that they said they carried out in Syria. They didn't mention Jordan in their statement, but that is to be expected. Like, the smart money here is on the Islamic Resistance in Iraq simply because they have the capabilities and they have been striking U.S. facilities across Iraq and Syria for months now. Now, this is where it starts to get kind of confusing, kind of messy. If it's complicated and sounds that way, that's how it's supposed to be. This is Iran's plan here. So the Islamic Resistance in Iraq is an umbrella grouping of Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. It is a part of the so-called axis of resistance that includes Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Iran. A lot of these groups, these are not forward-deployed Iranian units. All right, these are made up of local fighters for the most part. They are not 100% in lockstep with Iranian goals and plans, but they are enough in line to where Iran is able to leverage these proxy forces. That's kind of how this works. So in this case, the argument is, did Iran direct this attack, and has Iran been directing these attacks by proxy forces against U.S. bases in the region, or are these proxies carrying it out on their own behalf? Are they acting in their own self-interest to do these things? And that confusion, that inability to really dial that in for sure, is the Iranian proxy plan in the Middle East, and it is incredibly hard to fight back against. So in terms of official statements here, the spokesperson for the Iranian Foreign Ministry said the Islamic Republic of Iran has no role in decisions by resistance groups on how they support the Palestinian nation or defend their people. And this kind of confusing gray area is how Iran wants it. And I said it a couple days ago in a video. I stand by it, and I'll say it again here. We are at war with Iran, but it is on Iranian terms. Like it or not, this is what war with Iran looks like. This tempo and intensity of strikes against U.S. forces, 160 in the past 3 months, that is not business as usual. It's just not. It's been nowhere near that for years in the Middle East. Right? So it's not crazy that U.S. forces in Iraq, Syria, and other places might come under fire occasionally. But 160 attacks in 3 months is not occasional. Every single day, American forces are dodging missiles, drones, rockets, and mortars across the region. That is these Iranian-backed groups carrying out the Iranian proxy strategy in the Middle East. Again, it might not be the war that we want to fight or how we would like to go to war with Iran should that ever kick off. It's the fight that we're in. Now, one of the challenges here is the U.S. response, right? So we're talking about how some of these groups at times are acting in their own self-interest for a variety of reasons, whether it's for money, power, influence, respect, whatever it might be. They are not 100% in lockstep with Iranian goals. So an Iraqi militia group that falls under the Islamic Resistance of Iraq that receives funding, weapons, and training from Iran also has their own local goals. Right? And sometimes those local goals mean attacking U.S. forces. So the challenge here for the United States going forward, and has always been, is if these attacks were carried out entirely by a local group and we strike Iran, that's a pretty major escalation, right? However, if the strike was carried out at the direction of Iran and they provided targeting and resources, materials, and gave the green light, and then we strike a militia group, it doesn't really do anything, right? This is Iran's strategy. And it's just playing right into their hands how they want to fight this war, and they're going to continue doing that. So there's 3 things to keep an eye on here in terms of how this could play out going forward. So the first that I would expect in terms of a U.S. response, which as of this reporting, I haven't seen anything quite yet, haven't seen anything take place. The first kind of baseline expectation here is that the U.S. will launch a strike against the launch location and storage facilities tied to this specific attack, right? So the attack was launched from location X. Expect the United States, and we'll be able to know that after the attack, expect the United States to strike that specific location and any nearby facilities that could have been used in this exact attack. All right. The second one would be targeting the leadership of the group responsible for this attack. So in previous attacks, for instance, Kataib Hezbollah was labeled as responsible. And after some of those went on for a little while, we eventually struck one of the leaders of Kataib Hezbollah, killing him in a drone strike just out or in Baghdad, I believe. That is kind of level 2 in terms of response here. Level 3, which would be pretty significant and something we haven't seen in quite a while now, would be a strike against IRGC leadership in Iraq or Syria that helped to facilitate and equip these militias to help carry out this attack. That would, we're kind of getting back into the strike that killed Soleimani, maybe not quite to that extent. That was major and still something that Iran points to as wanting to get revenge against the United States, but something to that degree, kind of stopping, not so far as striking inside of Iran, more on that in a second, but striking their leadership that is helping to set up these proxy forces around the region. That is kind of personal opinion. I think that's probably as far as the United States would go in terms of response here. There have been a lot of calls for strikes inside of Iran. I don't think that's seriously on the table. I think that, look, unfortunately, the Americans coming under attack in Iraq and Syria and Americans being killed by these Iranian-backed militias is not new. The intensity has picked up quite a bit in recent months, but this type of attack, this style of attack, the causing casualties, none of this is new. There's no reason that I can see why this specific event would lead to the United States for the first time in I don't know how long, striking inside of Iranian territory. I don't know if we've ever carried out an actual airstrike or missile strike inside of Iran. So it's hard to see as strong of emotions they're out there right now, and people wanting revenge for these dead soldiers. It's hard to imagine that this would lead to an actual strike in Iran. So we'll keep an eye on this. Of course, it's another escalation. It's something we've been warning about for quite a while on this channel. Is the minute that rounds started flying, the minute that U.S. bases were intercepting rockets and drones and shooting them down at a pretty high clip, all it takes is for one to get through. And now all of a sudden it happened. And there's calls from major politicians and leaders in the United States to go to war with Iran. right? Just happen just like that. We're starting to see how quickly something like this can spiral. So we'll certainly keep an eye on it. Then shifting back into Israel, we got some more information about the allegation against the United Nations workers that were accused of taking part in the October 7th attack into Israeli territory alongside Hamas. So Israel provided some of their intelligence to the U.S. government, as well as a handful of other governments that pulled their funding from UNRWA over the course of the past 48, 72 hours. The New York Times said they got their hands on a part of this. What they were able to gather was that one of these workers was accused of kidnapping a woman. Another is said to have handed out ammunition. A third was described as taking part in the massacre at a kibbutz where 97 people died. And all were said to be employees of the United Nations aid agency that schools, shelters, and feeds hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. So they went into not just we think some people participated, but showing down to the individual, here's what this person did at this time on this day in this location. While he was employed by the United Nations. It sounds like Israel also, in this kind of intelligence dump, provided to the U.S. and other governments. There was some phone monitoring as well, where they're picking up phone calls from some of these UN workers made from inside of Gaza during and shortly after the October 7th attacks, where these aid workers are talking about having taken part in the attacks. So again, it does sound like there's a full investigation that is in the works. The United Nations appears to be the one conducting that. We'll wait for the results to come out. But again, as of now, more and more information coming out about the role of some of these United Nations employees on the during the October 7th attacks. Then turning down to the international shipping mess around Yemen, the Gulf of Aden, the Red Sea, all of that. It's not getting better. It's getting worse. So yesterday, the Houthis said that they successfully targeted the U.S. Navy ship, the Louis B. Puller, while it was sailing in the Gulf of Aden. I haven't seen anything from any U.S. sources about that at all. Like usually the U.S. will say we shot down these drones or this missile was launched at us and it impacted in the sea. Nothing. So a little bit unusual there, but the frequency of these attacks are becoming so commonplace that we're starting to see more and more discrepancy. The first few when this came out, it was very clear. You could look at the U.S. statement and you could look at the Houthi statement and kind of compare the two. More and more, we're getting statements from one side or the other and nothing from the opposing side, if that makes sense. Right? So getting a little harder to fully understand what's happening in that region. Now, as the Houthis continue to disrupt shipping around Yemen, the Somali pirates, remember those guys? Haven't gone away. They're increasing their threat in the same area. So just yesterday, the Indian Navy thwarted a hijacking attempt of an Iranian flagged vessel, and more on that in a second. It was hijacked, but then the Indian Navy was able to secure the release of the crew. It's just chaos. And it's not just the Houthis, but Somali pirates as well that have really ramped up activities in this region just in the last few months. Now, we covered this in a recent piece on Substack. It's free. Link is in the description below. Adam Roussel talked about this, bit of a deep dive, talking about the additional challenge that this presents to international shipping that now have to go around the Horn of Africa, right? Because more and more ships are not sailing through the Gulf of Aden because of the Houthi threat. Now they're going around the Horn of Africa. A major portion of that is along the Somali coast, and the attacks by these Somali pirates have only increased. So it's all connected in so many different ways. Just last week, the United States carried out a series of strikes against al-Shabaab in Somalia. The al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group, the U.S. said they killed as many as 20 fighters in that strike. There's a broader civil war brewing in Somalia right now between al-Shabaab and the Somali government. And while these pirates are not necessarily a part of al-Shabaab, when al-Shabaab has had control of those ports, they have allowed the pirates to continue operations. They've been able to strike a deal. And there's been some rumors in the past that al-Shabaab has actually used some of these pirates to, quote, hijack certain ships from Iran as a way to kind of smuggle in Iranian weapons and technology into Somalia. So there are some links between al-Shabaab, which is a Sunni group aligned with al-Qaeda, and Iran, a Shia country. It gets deeper than that in so many different ways. There is a past between al-Qaeda and Iran. Islamic State and Iran, bad terms, right? They're carrying out attacks inside of Iran and still threatening to carry out more. And Iran has carried out strikes against Islamic State targets in portions of the Middle East. The al-Qaeda-Iran relationship is a little more complicated, and al-Shabaab is a branch of al-Qaeda. So it's, look, all eyes right now are on Yemen with the Houthis, which is understandably so. But don't sleep on Somalia, because as things get cut off more and more around Yemen, more ships are going to head south around the Horn of Africa, right into Somali pirate territory. Expect that to increase. And again, starting to see some links there between the Al-Shabaab terrorist organization and potentially the Iranians. Again, check out the Substack in the description below for a little more in-depth look at that emerging threat. Then last week, we got news of an attack in Edmonton where a security guard walked into City Hall and started shooting and tossed a Molotov cocktail before eventually being detained by police. I've seen some people refer to this as because of the war in Gaza, right? That is a contributing factor as to why this lone wolf style attack took place. I don't know, not yet. It's a little too early. We do have a fair amount of information on the motives here, but it's just a mess. So I wanted to bring this up just because I'm seeing it enter the conversation, and we've talked about this a lot before on this channel. The concern, the threat of lone wolf style attacks in the United States or anywhere around the world, when people are looking at what is happening in Gaza and say, I don't like this, I want to do something, then you look at all these different groups from Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, all of these groups, Iran, are referring to what is happening in Gaza as happening at the hands of the Americans. And it's a way to inspire attacks abroad. Islamic State's big campaign right now at the start of 2024 is to inspire attacks abroad against American and Israeli interests. So we have to keep that in mind, which is why I thought it was worth bringing this up. Now, prior to entering City Hall, this suspect filmed a short video where he ranted just about a lot of stuff. And this is where I say it gets kind of messy. So one of the things he said was that we need to rise up and put a stop to this genocide that's going on in Gaza and throughout the world. So by itself, you can see that clearly a motivator for this attack. But there was a lot here as well. In addition to complaining about the genocide in Gaza that he talks about, he brings up the cost of housing, inflation, saying that we need to stop being on our phones. We got to promote healthy social lives. We got to start filtering our water, watch what we're eating. And our officials need to start promoting healthy diet and exercise. So all over the map, right? I think this is one of those things that could be leveraged in one way or another if people are trying to create a narrative about why this person did what he did. So the Gaza piece is in there. I would not say that it is the overarching theme of what he did. But then, one of the other pieces here, he kind of wraps up his video statement by saying, Inshallah, I will succeed with my mission. If I don't succeed, I know somebody else will succeed for me. Again, messy is the way I would put this right now. We have seen previous attacks carried out by Islamic State or Al-Qaeda lone wolf inspired actors, and they tend to be pretty clear with their messaging. So I wouldn't put this on any one of those groups. It seems very much lone wolf. But there's just so many different things the guy points to that I would not right now refer to this as an attack necessarily directly inspired by what is happening in Gaza. But again, wanted to bring it up. We'll keep an eye on that and any other of these style of attacks that continue going forward. That's all I got for now. Of course, if interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out the Substack linked in the description below. The most recent article, it's freely available to everyone. Talked about it a little bit earlier in the video, is about the risk, the threat that Somali pirates and Al-Shabaab poses to international shipping as they are now avoiding Yemen and starting to go around the Horn of Africa. I think it adds some really nice context, kind of additional information about what we're seeing play out in the Middle East. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.